El Dorado was never a city, at least not at the beginning. The legend was born from a ritual, not from stone walls or golden streets. Deep in the highlands of what is now Colombia, among the Muisca people, power, faith, and gold were woven together in a ceremony that would one day ignite one of the greatest obsessions in human history. According to early accounts, a newly chosen chief, or cacique, was covered in fine gold dust and carried on a raft to the center of a sacred lake. There, surrounded by priests and offerings, he cast gold and emeralds into the water as gifts to the gods. This act was not about wealth. It was about balance, renewal, and divine legitimacy. Gold for the Muisca was sacred, not currency. When Spanish conquistadors heard of this ritual in the early 16th century, meaning was lost in translation. What they understood was simple. A man covered in gold. El Dorado, the golden one. In a world driven by conquest and extraction, this single image was enough to transform a spiritual tradition into a promise of infinite riches. Stories traveled faster than truth. Each retelling added new details, new exaggerations, new lies. A golden man became a golden city. A city became a kingdom. A kingdom became an entire land overflowing with wealth beyond imagination. Maps changed. Rumors hardened into certainty. El Dorado was no longer just a story. It was a destination. And once Europeans believed such a place existed, the search became inevitable. What began as a misunderstood ritual would soon pull explorers, soldiers, and dreamers into jungles and rivers they could not survive. The legend had been born. Long before El Dorado became a European obsession, it belonged to the world of the Muisca, one of the most advanced indigenous civilizations of pre-Columbian South America. They lived on the high plateau of the eastern Andes, in a region of fertile valleys, cold lakes, and carefully cultivated land. Their society was organized, prosperous, and deeply spiritual, far removed from the chaotic image later imposed by outsiders. The Muisca were master goldsmiths, but not in the way the conquistadors imagined. It was sacred material, shaped into offerings, symbols, and ritual objects. Its value was spiritual, not economic. Power among the Muisca came from harmony with the gods, not accumulation. At the heart of the El Dorado legend stood Lake Guatavita, a circular crater lake surrounded by steep mountains. To the Muisca, this was not a place of treasure. It was a sacred portal between the human world and the divine. During the investiture of a new ruler, priests led the ceremony that would later echo across the world. Covered in gold dust, the cacique stood on a raft and made offerings to the lake, returning gold to the gods from whom it symbolically came. Archaeology confirms this tradition. Gold objects, offerings, and ritual artifacts have been recovered from the lake and surrounding areas. The most famous is the Muisca raft, a finely crafted gold figure depicting the ceremony itself, silent proof that the core of the legend was real, even if everything built upon it was not. To the Muisca, the ritual reaffirmed balance, legitimacy, and cosmic order. To the Europeans who heard of it, it confirmed only one thing: unimaginable riches waiting to be taken. Two worldviews collided at Lake Guatavita, one rooted in meaning, the other in possession. In that collision, the truth of El Dorado began to disappear, submerged beneath greed and misunderstanding. What remained was a distorted reflection of a sacred tradition, one that would soon lure entire expeditions into the unknown. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas, they came with steel, horses, and an insatiable hunger for gold. Empires like the Aztecs and the Incas had already proven that unimaginable wealth could be extracted through conquest. Against this backdrop, the legend of El Dorado did not sound like fantasy. It sounded inevitable. Reports from the interior of South America spread quickly among soldiers, governors, and the Spanish crown. Each rumor confirmed what they wanted to believe. Somewhere beyond the mountains and jungles existed a land overflowing with gold. Conquest turned into obsession. Men abandoned settled colonies to chase whispers, driven by ambition, desperation, and the promise of eternal fame. Explorers like Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada, Sebastian de Belalcázar, and Nicolaus Federmann pushed deep into unknown territory, often unaware that they were pursuing the same illusion. They followed indigenous guides under coercion, misunderstood languages, and interpreted silence as secrecy. Every hardship was taken as proof that something priceless lay just beyond reach. Gold fever warped judgment. Expeditions ignored warning signs, underestimated the environment, and brutalized local populations in search of information. Rivers became graveyards. Jungles swallowed entire columns of men, yet failure only strengthened belief. If El Dorado was so hard to find, they reasoned, it must be because it was so valuable. The Spanish crown encouraged the search, offering titles and privileges to those who succeeded. El Dorado became a political tool as much as a legend-fueling expansion into land Spain barely controlled. Maps filled with imaginary cities. Blank spaces became promises. In this climate of obsession, El Dorado ceased to be a place tied to the Muisca ritual. It became a symbol of infinite reward, always distant, always unattainable. And the more men failed to find it, the deeper into madness the search descended. As the legend of El Dorado spread, expeditions pushed ever deeper into the interior of South America, far beyond the reach of maps or supply lines. What awaited them was not gold, but one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Dense jungles, endless rivers, disease, and starvation became the true enemies of the search. Men marched into regions no European had ever seen, guided by rumor and desperation. Rivers were mistaken for pathways to fortune, only to lead into flooded forests and swamps. Tropical diseases tore through expeditions, killing more men than combat ever did. Food ran out. Horses collapsed. Armor rusted. The jungle advanced faster than the men who tried to conquer it. One of the most infamous journeys was that of Gonzalo Pizarro, who led hundreds into the Amazon basin in search of El Dorado. The expedition disintegrated under hunger and exhaustion. Out of this disaster emerged Francisco de Orellana, who followed the river eastward in a desperate bid for survival, becoming the first European to traverse the Amazon. El Dorado had not been found, but a continent had been crossed at unimaginable cost. Discipline collapsed as suffering increased. Mutiny, desertion, and violence followed. Some explorers turned on their own men. Others executed indigenous guides, accused of deception. Fear replaced reason. Each failure hardened the belief that El Dorado was real just further away. Whole expeditions disappeared without trace, leaving behind only broken weapons and scattered bones. In the jungles, El Dorado became less a destination and more a curse pulling men forward while destroying them piece by piece. By now, the legend had devoured thousands of lives. Yet still, it refused to die. Because as long as gold had not been found, it could still exist somewhere beyond the next river, the next mountain, the next mistake. As decades passed and no golden city was found, El Dorado began to change. What had once been a man, then a ritual, then a city, now transformed into something even more elusive, a mirage that shifted location every time it was approached. Failure did not end the legend. It reshaped it. Each failed expedition pushed the myth farther east, deeper south, further into uncharted territory. Maps filled with imaginary lakes, kingdoms, and cities that no one had ever seen, but everyone believed in. Cartographers drew El Dorado not from evidence, but from hope. By the late 16th century, El Dorado was no longer tied to the Muisca or Lake Guatavita. It had become a floating idea attached to the Amazon, the Orinoco, or the Guiana Highlands. The most famous of these imagined sites was Lake Parim, often shown on European maps with a golden city on its shores. Entire expeditions were launched to reach a place that existed only in ink. This transformation reveals the true nature of the myth. El Dorado survived because it adapted. Each failure was reinterpreted as proof of secrecy, not illusion. Each hardship confirmed that the prize must be extraordinary. Rational doubt had no place in a world driven by conquest and greed. Over time, El Dorado ceased to be a geographical objective and became a psychological one. It represented the belief that ultimate wealth was always just beyond reach, a promise powerful enough to justify endless suffering. By the time the legend reached its final form, El Dorado no longer needed to exist. The search itself had become the purpose. And in that endless pursuit, the myth achieved a kind of immortality, untouchable, unfalsifiable, and forever out of reach. By the early 17th century, the search for El Dorado began to fade, not because it had been disproven, but because it had exhausted those who chased it. Generations of explorers had marched into the unknown and returned with nothing but stories of suffering. The Golden City had never appeared, yet the damage was irreversible. What archaeology eventually revealed was both simpler and more profound than the myth. There was no city of gold, no empire built from precious metal. But there was truth at the heart of the legend, a real ritual, a real people, and a real worldview that Europeans failed to understand. El Dorado was born from misunderstanding, inflated by greed, and sustained by hope. Indigenous societies were destroyed or displaced. Landscapes were scarred by violence and forced exploration. Thousands died pursuing an illusion that grew stronger the more it escaped reality. El Dorado did not reward its seekers, it consumed them. Yet the myth endures. El Dorado became a symbol far greater than gold. It represents the human tendency to chase absolute wealth, perfect success, or ultimate meaning, often at the cost of reason and compassion. It appears in literature, film, and popular culture as a warning disguised as adventure. In the end, El Dorado was never meant to be found. It was a mirror, reflecting the desires of those who searched for it. The true treasure was not hidden in jungles or lakes, but in understanding how myths are born and how easily they can drive humanity into obsession. El Dorado vanished because it never existed, but its story remains, reminding us that the most powerful legends are not built on gold, but on belief.